Hello and welcome to our podcast on the introduction paragraph for essays. This is an exceptionally important part of the writing process because as you see the subtitle there, we don't want to just have the banana pancakes syndrome where we don't make any context for our comments or for our essay. And so let's go ahead and take a look at what we mean by introductions. So that introductory paragraph serves as, first off, a hook. It should be an inviting paragraph that encourages your readers to want to read. Now granted, this is probably a writing you've done for a school assignment, and so the teacher or whomever has to read your essay, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with spicing up those first couple lines to encourage that reader to actually want to read your writing, not to make it sound so boring and so mundane that they're just going to have to push themselves through it. The introductory paragraph also provides context for the essay and for that thesis statement. It explains to the reader why and where this idea of the thesis statement is even coming from. It doesn't just come out of thin air. This is that idea of the they say, I say structure. We are setting up the reasoning behind why we have written this essay. The they say, meaning what other scholars are saying about the topic, what other researchers have found, what other writers have said, that's often what makes up the bulk of our intro. And then we kind of whittle our way down to our thesis statement. And as we've seen in other podcasts, this is where we, the writers, expose our thoughts. This is where we reveal our opinions. And so we have this transition period where we're setting up why we're writing, and then we are then showing where our opinion fits in that massive superhighway of ideas. So maybe you've seen this image of potential intro paragraphs before, maybe you haven't. It's one I like to use. And basically it's just an inverted triangle to kind of give you a visual image of what should go into an intro paragraph. Ideally, your intro begins very factually and generally. It explains where this essay fits in. And it also begins kind of broad. We can't drill down to some very specific, minute point yet. We need to build context. As we're doing this, though, the paragraph becomes more opinionated and more specific. We transition from just factoids that are probably setting up context to revealing our own opinion. We need to warm up the reader to our opinion. We can't just walk up to somebody and say, hey, how's it going? Banana pancakes. We need to give them some context for why in the world we would even say banana pancakes. And this is what the intro paragraph does. At the same time that it's becoming opinionated, it's also becoming more specific. We're not talking about worldly things. We're not talking about all types of genres of text. We are talking about this one text in specific that we are writing about. Throughout this whole thing, we need to have those smoothing transitions to help our readers through. We need to use those transition words or phrases to help the reader understand the relationships of the sentences and therefore the relationship of the context to the actual piece that we're going to be talking about. Ultimately, though, our thesis statement, that one sentence that states the topic, states the opinion, and is predictive, should be the last sentence in the first paragraph. So if we follow the pattern of the diminishing triangle, that thesis statement should be the most opinionated and the most specific sentence in that intro paragraph. People oftentimes struggle with, what's the first thing I should say? How do I even start writing? And so here are a couple different ways. One idea is to frame the they say about your topic. What are others saying? What is other research implying? What are other papers saying about this topic? What has been said? This really proves to your reader that you know what you're talking about in terms of where the context is surrounding this essay that you're about to share with them. Perhaps number two, you offer some sort of attention-grabbing fact or quote or idea from the text that you're going to talk about. You've probably done some research on this, and you've probably learned some very interesting things, perhaps more so than your reader is familiar with. So why not share one of those right away? Maybe something shocking, something completely not predicted, that oftentimes would serve as a great hook to draw your reader in. because they're going to say, hey, wow, that was so cool about what they said in terms of how the character represented something. Well, let's go ahead and read a little bit more to find out why they're saying what they're saying. Finally, another potential way to start an essay is the idea of a grand statement. And this is similar to that first one that frames it in the they say, I say structure. But the idea is this. We want to go ahead and start building context for this essay. We can't talk about the use of similes in one specific novel if we don't explain where the novel came from, perhaps where the author came from, perhaps the time frame that that person was in, and kind of just setting the massive stage for this, and then whittling our way down from the factual and the general all the way down to the more opinionated and the more specific. As we get into the intro with some of those great hooks or leads or setting context, most likely, especially in our literature class, we're going to be talking about specific texts. So not only do we need to build context, but we need to reveal to the reader what we're actually talking about. And so a couple essentials. One, we need to tell them the title of the piece we're talking about. If it's a book, a play, a movie, whatever, we need to tell them exactly what we're talking about. We can't just hint at it and then jump to giving examples because we haven't built any context for those. So just a quick reminder for us, books, movies, plays, how those are punctuated. Additionally, we should probably mention, we need to mention the author or authors of our piece, because again, that gives some context. If Hemingway wrote a piece, perhaps we know something about Hemingway and how he structures stories or how he writes or his common themes. We need to build that by revealing the author. And finally, regardless of what we're writing about, we need to have a smooth flow of ideas from that first sentence all the way down to the thesis. We need to start factually and generally, and then work our way down to the most specific and the most opinionated sentence, which is going to be our thesis. We can't just jump in there and shock people. We need to warm them up, we need to build context, and we need to move them appropriately with reasonable pace to our thesis statement. And that comes in the form of transitions. So these next couple slides seek to give examples of each of those ways that we had talked about setting up an intro paragraph. The three different main ways: a hook, a catchy example, something like that. So as you're listening to these being read to you, please make sure that you examine and feel the pacing of them, but also observe how they're moving from very factually and generally to more specific and opinionated. And in all examples, the thesis statement is the last sentence in this paragraph. From the thesis statement being the last one in this paragraph, we can then predict what the next body sections are going to be from each. So this first example is from the they say, I say structure.
Professor Foster wrote in his book, How to Read Literature Like a Professor, that all students should read and experience a wide variety of texts from a wide variety of genres. He advocates that students begin to look deeper within the texts to better understand what the authors of those texts are truly saying. Foster continues to point out that students often struggle when asked to find symbolism hidden deep within the interpretive level of a text. Most specifically, Foster mentions how students rarely find Christian imagery, despite the fact that Christianity is the most prolific religion in the Western Hemisphere. That being said, Jerome Lawrence and Robert E. Lee wrote on multiple layers when composing Inherit the Wind. They sought to not only write about a fictional version of the Scopes trial, but they also intentionally sought to weave Christian imagery in throughout the players they wrote about Brady, Gates, and Hornbeck.
Here's another example, the idea of beginning your intro paragraph with a catchy quote.
The devil. And then a shrieking, running off stage lengths at one, scene one of Jerome Lawrence and Robert E. Lee's classic play Inherit the Wind. This outburst comes in response to a new character entering the fray for the first time. The defense attorney, Drummond, lurches across the scene, dragging his satchel with him like a partially evolved humanoid. This powerful entrance of an important character sets up the interpretive layer of this masterpiece about the 1920s. Not only is the play written about the goods and evils found in a courtroom, but it is also about the goods and evils found within the Bible. Inherit the Wind teaches lesson of evolution on the literal level, but also teaches lessons of biblical proportion when the authors delve into topics such as Christ imagery, allusions to the devil, and allusions to the tempting forbidden apple.
And then here's another example of an intro paragraph with the idea of a grand statement beginning and building context.
Since the dawn of mankind, people have struggled to determine from whence they came. Some theorized that mankind was, indeed, placed upon this earth by an almighty creator in an act of creationism, God creating the world as it is today in only 6 days. Others contended that man evolved from the smallest bacteria up to current-day humans over the span of millions of years. Regardless of which theory has taken hold in America's schoolhouses, Jerome Lawrence and Robert E. Lee's masterpiece, Inherit the Wind, bucks the establishment with a pointed and biting look at what should and should not be taught to inquisitive youth. Inherit the Wind serves as an excellent example of the struggle between conservative and liberal ideas, rural and urban ideas, and creationist and evolutionist ideals.
One way to think about moving the reader through your intro and ultimately down to your thesis statement is what I call the eyedropper technique. As we end one sentence with a word or phrase, we then want to take that same phrase or word and repeat it at the beginning of the next sentence. This really shows the reader that these two sentences are linked together. Now, we can't do this for every sentence, just taking the end of one and making it the beginning of another, because that would be weird. But every once in a while, instead of using some sort of contrived transition, we may want to try this because it does lead the reader through and show the connections between the sentences. So here's an example. And again, we will have these read by our favorite avatars.
Throughout history, change has frustrated some individuals while inspiring others.
Not every human, though, accepts change in the same way.
For example, in the 1920s, change was ripe to explode on the scene due to many amazing technological improvements.
Those technological improvements manifested themselves as change agents in the play Inherit the Wind by Lee and Lawrence.
So if you feel like you have a good grasp on writing intro paragraphs and you feel like you do an adequate job building context for your essay and leading your reader from the large topics to the more specific, which is your thesis, maybe you want to consider some more advanced ways to craft the intro paragraph. Number one, maybe you vary where your thesis statement is. It doesn't always have to be the last sentence in your first paragraph. The only place I think it'd be exceptionally distracting is if it came first, because there's no way that you've built enough context to not shock the reader with your opinion. Number two, maybe try a variety of hooks. Maybe you really are a strong writer in terms of using quotes or phrases from the book. Maybe you try your next one with some sort of grand statement where you build context. The last idea might be to vary the pace at which you get to your thesis. Sometimes a very quick intro would be great. A couple short sentences, thesis statement. Other times, maybe you need to meander a little bit. Maybe you do need to build some more context. Add some slowing transitions. Try that out. See how it works. Ultimately, though, your intro paragraph should be relatively proportional to the length of the essay. So if you're writing a 5-paragraph, 2 or 3-page paper for your high school course, your intro should probably be a paragraph-ish. As you lengthen the essay that you're writing, you do need to expand the intro to build more context. So if you feel like you have the idea of the inverted triangle down, or you're finding that you're getting bored with it, or you have proven that you can completely control that, maybe try some of these other ideas and intro your paper in a little bit more advanced or different way. As always, if you have any questions, please bring those to class. We will entertain those when we get there. Please bring in your notes, and we will start practicing immediately. Thanks a lot. We'll see you soon.